The Corfac Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years. Their name was not just spoken in fear, it was carried in silence, like a shadow that stretched across the stars. They were titans of flesh and armor, towering 12 feet tall, their black carapaces gleaming like obsidian war machines. For long arms ended in serrated claws, sharp enough to cut through steel. Their multifaceted eyes could track the faintest motion from miles away. But their true terror was not their strength or size. It was their belief. The Corfac believed that only the strongest species deserved the right to exist. To them, survival was not a matter of chance or culture or history. It was a verdict. A judgment written in extinction. For millennia, they had carried out that judgment, extinguishing species after species, erasing civilizations until only silence remained. And now, it was humanity's turn. Jake Morrison stood inside the command room of Luna Station, staring at the wall of screens that pulsed with bad news. He had served 20 years in the Earth Defense Force, long enough to see human colonies rise and fall, long enough to witness the petty wars between worlds. But nothing in his career had prepared him for the sight of the Corfac fleet spreading across human space. 3 months ago, first contact had been accidental. A lone Corfac scout ship intercepted a human trade vessel near Proxima Centauri. The humans had expected diplomacy, or at least negotiation. Instead, what followed was silence. And then the disappearances began. Human settlements were vanishing. One by one. Amy Carter sat at the communication console, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the latest reports. She was young, barely out of the academy. She had joined the military to see the stars, to chase wonder and exploration. But those same stars now carried nothing but grief. New Shanghai had gone dark yesterday. Before that, Europa Base had stopped sending signals. Always the same pattern. A colony cut off. A delay of 72 hours. And then, nothing. Amy whispered the words aloud, as if repeating them might make them less terrifying. 72 hours. That was the Corfac method. They would arrive in their massive black ships, so large they could blot out a planet's sun. For 3 days they would do nothing but observe, scanning human technology, recording behavior, watching like scientists studying insects. Then came the message, always the same, translated into every tongue of their victims. Your species has been judged unworthy of continued existence. And then the extermination began. Lisa Rodriguez knew what war looked like. She had fought in the Mars colonial wars, had seen human soldiers die for resources and pride. But this was different. The Corfac did not fight for territory. They did not fight for wealth. They fought because they believed weakness itself was a crime. From orbit, their weapons burned away defenses in a matter of minutes. Then came the ground forces, relentless and methodical, hunting survivors, erasing all evidence of life. What horrified Lisa most was the precision. Every Corfac attack followed the same pattern, a doctrine refined over centuries, repeated hundreds of times on hundreds of worlds. And yet, buried inside the horror, Lisa noticed something else. A thread of hope. Every time the Corfac struck, some humans escaped. Survivors were talking. They were sharing what little they knew, tactics, weaknesses, ship movements. For the first time in centuries of colonial division, human settlements were beginning to act as one. Far away, aboard the Corfac mothership drifting between stars, War Master Thenath opened the files on species number 848. Humans. He felt no excitement. No fear. Only satisfaction. Humanity would be just another entry in the Great Archive, the living record of every species the Corfac had exterminated. It contained the history of the crystal beings of Vuldur, who could shape matter with thought but surrendered without resistance. It recorded the aquatic Nephilim, whose vast oceanic cities boiled away into steam. It even preserved the energy beings of the Outer Rim, who could slip between dimensions but could not withstand simple solid matter weapons. Every species had its strengths. Every species had its weakness. The Corfac had spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of extinction. To them, annihilation was not cruelty. It was efficiency. And humans? Primitive. Weak. Divided. Their technology decades behind. Their societies fractured by endless quarrels. Easy prey. But what Thenath could not see in his cold archive was the truth of desperation. Desperation can forge unity faster than any treaty. As news of the attack spread, something extraordinary began. Colonies that had once feuded over resources began pooling their fleets. Corporations once obsessed with profit were offering ships and supplies. Even worlds that had distrusted Earth for generations were now looking back toward the homeworld for guidance. Fear was supposed to paralyze them. But instead, it was awakening something buried deep in human nature. Helen Wright sat beneath Geneva, in a bunker of steel and light, surrounded by screens filled with fragments of data. She was a scientist, one who had spent her life studying predator-prey dynamics on Earth. Wolves and elk. Lions and gazelles. Sharks and seals. Now she faced a predator unlike any she had studied. The Corfac. Apex killers not of Earth, but of the galaxy. She pored through every survivor's report, mapping out behaviors, searching for patterns. She knew one thing with certainty: no predator hunts without exposing something of itself. General Frank Davis had fought 3 wars across 3 worlds. He had seen human armies rise and fall, but nothing like this. The Corfac were not conquerors. They were not raiders. They were executioners. Their war was not for power. It was ritual, the ritual of erasure. And yet, in the war rooms of Earth, Frank saw something that surprised him more than the enemy's power: unity. Human generals who had been rivals just months ago now sat at the same table. Old enemies became allies. Even separatist rebels from Europa were sending intelligence to Earth. The Corfac had judged humanity as weak. But their very judgment was forcing humanity to shed its divisions. Pete Johnson bore scars across his face, remnants of a war fought against human rebels. He remembered their reasons: politics, ideology, survival. He could understand them. But the Corfac were different. They killed without anger. Destroyed without gain. They were a force of nature, an extinction engine. And against such a force, humanity had only one choice: to become something more than prey. As the outer colonies fell, refugees streamed toward Earth. They carried stories, stories that made soldiers weep. Maria Lopez, once a teacher, sat in a debriefing room describing the final days of her world. She spoke steadily, though her hands shook. She described civilians herded into groups before the final slaughter began. Helen Wright took careful notes. Every word mattered. Every detail might become the key to survival. Patterns emerged. The 72-hour observation. The predictable extermination sequence. But there was something else, something unsettling. Survivors kept repeating the same chilling detail. The Corfac were leaving witnesses. Not by accident. By. The first wave of extermination should have broken humanity. At least, that was how the Corfac expected it to unfold. Fear was the foundation of their doctrine. Fear was the quiet weapon that had toppled hundreds of civilizations before humanity ever reached the stars. But the Corfac miscalculated. For every world they burned, fragments of knowledge escaped with the survivors. And unlike other species that scattered in silence, humans gathered those fragments. They stitched terror into strategy, grief into purpose. In the ashes of defeat, something resembling unity was being born. Helen Wright spread datapads across the steel table of the underground bunker in Geneva. Every one of them carried the testimony of survivors. Timelines. Ship movements. Weapon On Earth, she had studied wolves chasing elk. Wolves never struck immediately. They circled. They probed. They tested the herd's reaction before committing to the kill. The Corfac were no different. They're not gods, Helen whispered to herself. They're hunters. And hunters bleed. She knew what the generals did not, the Corfac's perfection was a mask. Beneath the ritual, they carried habits. Predictable choices. Even predators could be deceived. The war rooms beneath Earth's surface filled with voices that once would have never shared the same air. Generals from rival nations. Leaders of separatist colonies. Corporate directors. Frank Davis, scarred and gray-haired, leaned across the table. Every time they strike, they follow the 72-hour cycle. Observation. Judgment. Extermination. He tapped the data points. It means they're not adapting. That's exploitable. Lisa Rodriguez, the veteran soldier, frowned. Exploitable how? We can't outgun them. Their ships dwarf ours. Their weapons slice through our fleets like paper. Helen answered quietly. Prey survives by forcing the predator to overcommit. To chase longer than expected. To bleed more energy than anticipated. Survival isn't about victory. It's about buying time. Time. That was what humanity needed more than anything. And time would only be bought with sacrifice. Jake Morrison stood aboard the fleet carrier Resolute, staring out at the black void. He knew what his orders meant. He and thousands of others had volunteered to lead the ghost fleets, decoy squadrons sent to draw the Corfac into costly pursuits. They would not return. But their deaths would stretch. The Predator's patience, buying days, perhaps weeks, for others to regroup. On the eve of departure, Amy Carter approached him. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Do you think it matters? Jake didn't look away from the viewport. If it buys one more child a chance to grow old, it matters. Amy's eyes shimmered. She wanted to say more, but the alarms called them to their stations. The ghost fleets vanished into the dark. Humanity's first true sacrifices had begun. Across the colonies, resistance took strange forms. Miners on Titan turned their drills into weapons, tunneling beneath Corfac patrols before detonating entire caverns. Refugees on Ceres seeded the asteroid belt with hidden explosives, tearing apart Corfac supply convoys. Civilians on abandoned stations left behind false signals and fake transmissions, luring the enemy into ambushes. Every tactic was desperate. Every victory was small. But they added up. For the first time in history, the Corfac were bleeding. Inside the mothership, Warmaster Thenath studied the reports with a growing sense of irritation. Humanity was not collapsing. Not yet. Their prey should have fled or begged for mercy by now. Instead, the humans were resisting. It was inefficient. Wasteful. Irrational. Thenath's clawed hands flexed against the console. He considered the archive, the living history of extinction. No species had ever resisted this long. Not the Vuldur. Not the Nephilim. Certainly not the fragile insectoid swarms of the Outer Rim. Humanity's persistence was an anomaly. A flaw. And flaws demanded correction. What the Corfac did not understand was the human mind itself. Fear did not always paralyze. Sometimes it sharpened. Sometimes it forged resolve. Unlike most prey, humanity was not bound by instinct alone. They carried something else, memory, imagination, and a strange, reckless will to defy logic itself. Predator and prey. The Corfac believed the roles were fixed. But humans were rewriting the rules of the hunt. The turning point came at Vega Prime. The Corfac had moved to extinguish the colony there, following the same ritual, 72 hours of observation, then the judgment, then the slaughter. But in their precision, they exposed themselves. A small band of human marines, led by Lisa Rodriguez, infiltrated one of the enemy's relay stations. Their mission was simple: gather intelligence, then die. What they found was far more than they expected. Deep inside the blackened corridors of the Corfac structure, they uncovered fragments of the archive itself. Databanks containing the recorded history of hundreds of species. The Marines transmitted everything they could before the walls shook with approaching claws. Lisa's last transmission was a single phrase, her voice ragged but triumphant. "We have their history." The signal cut. None of the Marines survived. But their sacrifice changed everything. Helen Wright sat sleepless in the Geneva bunker, the databanks glowing before her. She scrolled through endless entries. Names of species long gone. Worlds erased. Cultures silenced. But woven into the archive was something unexpected, the Corfac fear of memory itself. They had exterminated civilizations, yes, but they had preserved them too. In trying to erase weakness, they had created a monument to it. An unintentional proof that every predator leaves a record of its kills. Frank Davis saw it instantly. "We don't keep this hidden. We don't bury it. We weaponize it." Operation Pack Hunter was born. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution: broadcast the Corfac archive across the galaxy. Show every surviving species the truth of the Empire's crimes. Reveal that the galaxy's executioners were not gods but hunters, hunters who could be wounded. To do so, humanity would need to spread the archive through every channel, every beacon, every stolen transmitter. Thousands would die smuggling the data out. But if even a fraction of the message reached alien ears, the galaxy itself might awaken. Pete Johnson volunteered first. He had seen enough blood to know where the path led. "We may never see the end of it," he said. "But someone has to light the fire." The war rooms fell silent. In that silence, they understood. Humanity was no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting to transform the galaxy itself. On the Corfac mothership, Thenath felt the first threads of unease. The prey was no longer predictable. Reports of ambushes, feints, and false signals arrived daily. Now whispers of data leaks stirred through the fleet. Thenath tightened his claws. He would crush this species. He would erase their defiance from the stars. Yet a question lingered, unspoken even in his own mind. Had the hunters underestimated their prey? The ghost fleets continued their suicide missions. Colonies turned themselves into fortresses. Scientists worked sleeplessly to decode the enemy's technology. Every sacrifice fed into a single truth. Humanity was no longer prey waiting for slaughter. They were predators learning to hunt. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Corfac Empire was being stalked. The Corfac Empire had survived for 3,000 years by perfecting one truth: fear spreads faster than fire. They believed no prey could resist the silence of inevitability. No species could look into the eyes of annihilation and respond with anything but surrender. But now, across the stars, a different message was spreading. Operation Pack Hunter had begun. Pete Johnson sat in the cockpit of a stolen freighter, his scarred hands gripping the controls. In the cargo hold was no weapon, no soldiers, no supplies, only data. The archive. The Corfac's own record of extinction, smuggled from world to world. Every jump risked discovery. Every beacon he approached might be monitored. But he pressed on. He was not alone. Dozens of ships, hundreds of operatives, scattered across the galaxy with the same mission: to set the truth free. When the first broadcast went out, the galaxy trembled. On the frozen world of Uran, insectoid survivors gathered around a stolen receiver, listening to voices of species they had believed long vanished. On the ocean planet of Vera, amphibian refugees wept as they saw images of the Nephilim, erased centuries ago, their final days preserved by the very killers who had destroyed them. The archive did more than reveal death. It revealed pattern. Proof that the Corfac were not gods. Proof that the exterminations were ritual, repeated again and again. And proof that the hunters could be resisted. One by one, silence gave way to whispers. Whispers grew into cries. And across the stars, cries turned into a roar. War Master Thenath stood within the mothership, staring at the impossible. Reports flooded in, resistance cells rising on worlds long pacified, ancient technologies stirring in hidden vaults, and fleets gathering where none should exist. The archive had broken the Empire's spell. For the first time in 3 millennia, prey was refusing to scatter. Thenath hissed in fury. They spread infection. They awakened the dead. But the truth was simpler. Humanity had turned memory into a weapon. On Earth, Helen Wright leaned back in her chair, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She watched the data streams ripple across the galaxy. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "We've done more than fight back," she said. "We've broken their illusion." Frank Davis nodded grimly. "But that means they'll come for us harder than ever." "Let them," Lisa Rodriguez said. Her face was pale but her eyes burned. "We're not hiding anymore." The galaxy was stirring. The crystalline remnants of Valda revealed themselves, having hidden fragments of their kind in deep space. They joined the broadcast with their own testimonies, shaping light into weapons humanity had never seen. The oceanic Nephilim, once thought boiled into extinction, resurfaced from abyssal trenches where they had endured in secret, their colossal waterborne warships rising from the deep. Even the enigmatic energy beings returned, slipping through dimensions to strike at Corfac supply lines, their revenge long delayed but unstoppable. All across the stars, species once divided by fear now looked toward Earth, the world that had dared to speak the truth aloud. Humanity had become something it had never been before, not merely prey, not merely survivors, but a catalyst. A spark that ignited a galactic firestorm. For Jake Morrison, who had flown the ghost fleets into hopeless battles, the shift was surreal. "We were supposed to die forgotten," he said quietly, watching the transmissions ripple across space. "Instead, the galaxy remembers." Amy Carter, still trembling at her post, whispered back, "We made them remember." The Corfac struck harder than ever. Entire fleets descended upon Earth, determined to cut off the rebellion at its root. Cities burned. Oceans boiled. Orbit became a graveyard of steel. But this time, humanity was not alone. Valder crystal ships refracted the Corfac's beams into harmless rainbows. Nephilim leviathans rose from the sea to drag invaders into watery graves. Energy beings darted between dimensions, disrupting communication and sowing chaos. It was not victory. Not yet. But for the first time, it was a war the Corfac could lose. Thenath raged in his command chamber. He had never known such resistance. His claws tore into the steel. For millennia, the Empire had been unstoppable. Now, prey were uniting, predators themselves turning upon the hunters. And in his fury, he could not see the deeper truth, that humanity had changed the galaxy forever. Helen Wright stood among the ruins of a half-destroyed observatory, looking up at the night sky. The stars shimmered with the faint glint of fleets locked in battle. She thought of wolves, of lions, of sharks, predators that had once ruled Earth. Even they had been humbled, forced to adapt, to coexist. Perhaps the Corfac were no different. Perhaps predators that cannot change are destined to fall. Lisa Rodriguez stood beside her. Armor scorched from battle. "Do you think we'll win?" Helen didn't answer immediately. She looked back at the burning horizon, at the endless war now stretching across the stars. Finally, she said, "Winning isn't the point. Surviving is. And survival is the first step toward something greater." The broadcasts continued, even as ships burned and worlds fell. Across the galaxy, civilizations awakened from silence. Some rose in vengeance. Others rose in grief. But all of them rose together. Humanity had given them something the Corfac never expected. Not weapons. Not technology. But memory. Defiance. The refusal to vanish quietly. And with it came a shift so profound it could not be undone. Pete Johnson, aboard yet another smuggler's ship, sent out his final transmission before Corfac hunters closed in. His voice was calm, steady, even as the alarms screamed around him. "We are not prey," he said. "We are guardians. Not just of Earth. Not just of humanity. But of every life the Corfac sought to erase. This is no longer their galaxy. It belongs to all of us." The signal cut. His ship was gone. But his words traveled on, carried by countless beacons, repeated in countless tongues. Guardians. That was the word that endured. And so the war shifted. Humanity, once judged unworthy, had become the protector of memory itself. Their role was not to conquer, but to remind the galaxy of what had been lost and what could be preserved. The Corfac had tried to erase history. Instead, they had immortalized it. And now, for the first time in 3,000 years, the hunters were running out of prey. This HFY Sci-Fi story reaches its climax here, but the echoes remain. Humanity rose from extinction's edge to ignite a galactic uprising, not by strength alone, but by refusing to forget. What do you think, is humanity's greatest weapon truly memory? Or something deeper, something uniquely ours? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more slow-paced, existential science fiction that asks what it means to be human in a hostile galaxy, make sure you subscribe. The story doesn't end here. In fact, it's only the beginning.